Thank you. Wow, I feel really honored to be on this soft, plushy dot and amongst all these world-changing, on-point other speakers. It's very inspiring. So, here we go. The name of this talk is Primal Technology, and I want to first define what primal means, just so that everyone has context on what I'm talking about tonight. And I'm saying it's relating to an early place in evolutionary development, basic Webster definition. And so I'm going to start out by saying where I'm coming from, what I am, why I'm here. So I'm an artist who works with technology. I was born in Texas. I was a fellow at the Banff New Media Institute. And I ran an interactive research lab in New York and Boston before moving to Amsterdam, where I've been working as a solo artist, focusing on technology. And so in lieu of TED tradition, I think you're always supposed to ask a question and answer it at the end. So here's a question: how you feel about all of the images in this presentation. Do they make you feel cold, scared, happy, insane, romantic? There's a big variety. So I'm going to go through a little timeline of where I've been going and how I got there. And so let's go back to the year 2000. And during this time, the internet was just starting to be a foundation for digital art. And I found that really interesting and inspiring because we're used to going to galleries and museums and public institutions to be able to see art in public space. There's other people around, there's people watching you. It's not at all a personal experience because you're conscious of how you are in that space. And so in 2000, I started creating net art and digital art online. So the kind of idea was animating paintings and giving them a little bit of life and a little bit of gesture so people could watch art as it was intended, just in the comfort of their own home with a glass of wine, wearing no pants, just basically being comfortable. And that started to create a very intimate experience with the artwork. So I was able to extract a more profound back and forth with the viewer and the artwork. And then in 2007, I started working in interactive, and I found that very interesting because suddenly you could make art and allow audience participation with it. So as opposed to the audience being a voyeur with the artwork, they were able to dance back and forth, click something, do something, and get a reaction. So you suddenly start creating this dance and this dialogue back and forth, which became very nice, like it would be with a partner in tango. And then in 2009, we started a company called Champagne Valentine, and that was the intention of taking these ideas of interactive and taking these romantic digital experiences, but running it underneath brands, and so having advertising be responsible for creating experiences that people can feel romantically adjusted to. And that opened up a lot of opportunity because we were able to make things on a large, grand scale, and just use budgets to be able to make projects that were impossible to realize as a solo persona. And then after that, I went back to being a solo art career, and I just wanted to focus on where I would go with my own point of view and take it away from brands once again. And so I'm going to go over 4 points, which is what I make art for. I make art for money, art for art purposes, art for pop purposes, and art for introspection. And so the first one is art for art's sake that I'd like to talk about. And one of the things I've learned a lot about making digital art is it's really interesting to make characters, to make personas, to give things names. Like this character's name is Mammy Baloobs, and I really like this idea of hiding behind the veil of the avatar. So it could be thought of as a transgender transmedia. So being able to hide behind this and represent myself is this voluptuous, surreal character. And so it opened up a lot of opportunities to start thinking about art having personality. And then there's also different contexts of doing art for museums like the Van Gogh Museum. We just did a show there recently. And for that, I learned something about how large scale works, because we use a 3 by 3 meter screen. And in some ways, if you if you transfix that screen with a personality, in this case, these are these legs that give gestures of like happiness or sadness, and then it's all using motion capture from dancers from the National Ballet doing a version of Giselle, but having to hold their pee, like they have to pee really bad. And so it creates this kind of caricature, but then when that's installed in a large scale, it really brings the whole architecture to life. So I think that's very interesting when dealing with public space, is not just what is the world that you're immersed in, but how does it affect the architecture around it. And then also for art's sake, I do a lot of things online still, so making digital looping pieces of art that still pay nod to my 2000 sensibility of letting art be online screen-based work. And then also bringing this work into gigantic virtual environments. And this is a virtual reality museum, which you can walk around, you can see this enormous space that you're in, but there's a loneliness factor to VR right now. Before social media and VR start interacting with each other, these are isolating experiences. So then it goes back to that point of view of like being in this artwork alone and having an intimate experience. And I think that's what virtual reality is doing now, until we start incorporating multiple personalities into that. And then of course, adding in like different ways that people can experience things. So if you bring in characters and these sort of digital avatars they start bringing in, then we give people a certain sense of intimacy, but with artificial beings and characters and thus forth. And then there's art for money, of course, because we all need to survive and do things like that. So I work a lot in the fashion industry because that's a good juxtaposition between digital art and these characters and these ideas of romantic beings, and it works well with fashion. So they do also television commercials, like this is for Adult Swim, which is incorporates technology into the absurdity and romantic gestures of this actress named Marianne Moeder, who's very famous in the Netherlands for being on a show called The Vrouwvlogel, I think. And then, and then also work a lot with culture magazines like ID magazines and places like that. And then there's art for pop purposes. I do a lot of work with Miley Cyrus, and this is a still from the tour visuals that we directed a couple of years ago. And what was interesting about that, and what I learned about doing this, is that if you work on a giant scale, in this case we had a screen 50 times the size of this projection behind me, we had that behind her singing, and what I learned about the artwork that we were making for it, if you treat digital art as a performative medium, so if you have a character that's off stage, walks on stage, does some kind of dance on the background, and then dances off, then the crowd goes crazy. So you get 25 million people really freaking out, going completely crazy, because that digital synthetic character has given them an intro, a build-up, and then has walked off stage. And so that's one thing that I learned about how to do that. And if you do that right, you just get 25 million people just really freaking out and going completely crazy. And then there's also doing art for pop purposes, but in the music video realm. And what's interesting about that, and what I've taken away from that, is that if you make some things intentionally bad or controversial sliced within a music video, that you're gonna get a strong reaction from the mass public. And so people will start mimicking it, criticizing it, getting irritated with, loving it, having a whole range of emotions, and that helps to make a successful video. It's not all about aesthetic visual quality, it's about giving people a dynamic range of feelings with music. It should not always be the best thing humanly possible, it should be the most dynamic thing humanly possible. And then also going into other kind of music video realms of using sort of humor and absurdity and references to things that we know to put into play. But the most important that I like to talk about is art for introspection. And for me, this is the most important because there's no strategy involved in art for introspection, because especially when you work as a career artist or a commercial artist, there's always like, oh, if this thing that I want to make or intend to make, is it going to work with this gallery or this museum? Like, you're always conscious of sort of where it should sit in the market. And we all have to do that. We all have to survive in some way. So the art for introspection, I just don't allow myself to go there. I just make really whatever I want. And this just gets me into a headspace of pure form and honesty with what I want to do. And this aspect of making art can be very lonely because it's less social. You're just doing things for yourself. You're not dealing with any public kind of intention. And so by doing this so much, which is where I spend the most amount of my time, is within this subject and category, is it starts to give me a feeling of when I do step out of introspection that I need to be more performative. And so that's why a lot of the work that I'm producing is a sort of a new form of performance medium. And that brings me into the 5 themes that are in my work. I like the work to be romantic, digital, confrontational, absurd, and blunt. In romantic, I see this as close to home. It's who I am at the core, really. I like that intimacy. I like that sort of flamboyant romantic intention, as shown here in this example of Adam and Eve being in the Garden of Eden. And then, of course, I like digital. There's something that the ultra-sensory capabilities of digital offers us new kinds of experiences, whether we're using VR, AR, or 3D. All of it is sort of there's an unfamiliar visual language that hasn't been discovered yet that digital offers, and I'm really interested in sort of pioneering and forefronting what's possible in that scope, so I find it inspiring. It's almost like a form of digital sorcery. And then confrontational. I think that's, it's very fun and unexpected, but it's also intended for serious art discourse. So I feel that confrontational work is necessary for it to be noticed in the stream of so many things being the same. You have to have something that pops, that people will notice. Whether they like it or hate it, at least they'll realize it and notice it. And then absurdity. I like to twist humor, but mix it with a high production value, almost like a person with horrible taste worked at Pixar. I think there's something like kind of charming about bringing that in. And then being blunt, and then to always be direct and visually, over the top. And it gives it more layers. It gives it like a loudness that I think is necessary. And if we look at this horrible CG thing, we could see that digital technology should feel less shiny and new. In my opinion, it has no romance. Because CG technology and computer graphics and visual effects, that whole language is amazing technologies that exist there, but so much of it is intended for a polished, perfectionist use. And I think that loses a lot of the best qualities of it. It's void of any emotion, really. And then, I try to give people like a message of forget cold innovation. I think this is important, that innovation is amazing, new technologies are amazing, but try not to make it too cold by perfecting it, otherwise we're all going to be in a sterile but highly technical reality, which is a scary thing. So I like to say, let's make technology primal and romantic. It should be as emotional and romantic and almost childlike, because it still is a young form of art, and that's inspiring, and the purity is what is, I think, important with making digital technology art. And then let it be a performance per se. Like, I really see that it should function as a personal performance. It can be more abrasive, it can be more aggressive, it can be more wild in tone, and it can really just offer something to us. And this is as a side note, this piece will be playing after I talk, and it's called Jizz Jazz, and it's a digital jazz band that will play any MIDI file. And I can get very much into the technical, but if we don't see digital art as this personal form of performance and expression, it really can feel like this. And this is the back end to what makes that. And so if you see from here that if you did something visual that represented kind of what you're seeing here, that could feel really cold, but still technically quite interesting. And so I like to say embrace the toddler stage. We should see it for its primal promises, its possibilities, and treat it like an angry child, almost hysterical, emotional, testing your limits, your patience, but let it be honest and not unnecessarily intellectual. It can be very basic, but at least keep purity. And then let it be loud and flawed. I think that it's good to be harsh, it's good to be blunt, it's good to be memorable through bad taste and ranting and shouting and whining. And so I think that when we're in a digital world, we should ask ourselves, what is the Freudian bite? And that we shouldn't forget the romance of whatever dialogue we're trying to create, whether it's visual art or not. And so regardless of what medium you guys are choosing to use and express yourself in, I think it's good to remember primal tendencies in your emotional dialogue. Thank you. Yeah.